to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, January 12th, 2016. Getting into the week, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Today, in our third hour, Dr. Kevin Barrett will be our on-air guest talking about a brand new book he's just come out with about the Charlie Hebdo false flag, and so we're going to be talking to him about all the information he has on that at this particular point. Now, obviously, big news, there was a terrorist blast over in Istanbul, 10 people dead, 9 of them were German, and there's a bit of an argument over just who did it because the authorities on the scene said the bomber had been identified as Saudi Arabian-born Nabil Fadl. But Ankara is insisting the suicide bomber was Syrian, looking for an excuse to justify an invasion of Syria. Now, as you heard on the top of the hour news, there's been a terror bombing, ISIS presumably, at a shopping mall in Baghdad that killed 48 people. The part they're not telling you is that this may have been a retaliation because the Iraq army has recaptured Ramadi's Great Mosque from ISIS. It's a major symbolic victory. The Iraqi army is going great guns now that they're not being hobbled by the U.S. presence. So they're doing really, really well there. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Steve in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
What do you think is going on? What do you think is going on with the oil? I know the price of it is really low, lowest than it's been in years. Then last year, Rockefeller sold 80% of its Exxon oil stocks. And now I'm hearing that Saudi Arabia has low reserves in oil. Do you think that spells the end of the petrodollar?
Well, the petrodollar is a political economic mechanism. It has actually very little to do with the availability of the oil. Saudi Arabia got into some serious economic trouble because of this attempt to crush oil prices as an economic weapon against Russia. And basically, Saudi Arabia and the U.S. hoisted on their own petard and triggered an oil price drop. This is being exacerbated by all the stolen Syrian oil that has been smuggled out of Syria through Turkey and is on the world market for about half the official price. And that's dragging the price down as well. Plus, consumption is way down. As more and more people are out of work, they're not driving, they don't need to buy gasoline. As more and more people don't have money to go buy anything, they're not driving down to the shopping mall. We're seeing a decline in shipping and rail transport. That reduces demand on petroleum products as well. So it's a little bit of a death spiral going on there, and everybody is thinking about their own immediate gain and not stepping back and looking at a way to maybe start pulling this back together in the global sense. But it does look like oil is going to continue to decline because the entire economy seems to be shuddering to a halt. And that makes today's last second shove into the green on the stock market that much more obviously a manipulation by the plunge protection team.
Yeah, because the dollar is tied to the oil, and I was just wondering, will that go down as far as the oil?
No, the dollar is not tied to the price of oil, or they wouldn't be changing the price of a barrel in U.S. dollars. So it's not tied to that. But, obviously this decline, we're talking about heading for $20 a barrel of oil when a year ago it was up over 100. And this is causing all kinds of disruption throughout the entire petrochemical industry right now.
Okay. All right. I was just trying to get some clarification.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, over in Yemen, civilians continue to suffer relentless bombing by the Saudi-led coalition acting as a proxy for the United States government to teach those people of Yemen that you do not kick out your imposed U.S. puppet ruler. And as we mentioned once again, the forces from Saudi Arabia bombed another Doctors Without Borders hospital on Sunday, killing at least 5 people, destroying several buildings that were part of this facility. And all of these are war crimes. And what makes it really significant is the countries supplying these weapons to Saudi Arabia to use on civilians are in violation of international law. Because when the United States or Great Britain sells weapons to other countries, there are conditions that these only be used for legitimate military purposes, and bombing civilians is not a legitimate military purpose. We're beginning to see some backlash happening from all of this Saudi Arabia aggression. Apparently, there have been explosions at Aramco oil facilities, which is embarrassing because Saudi Arabia was just getting ready to actually start issuing an IPO to take Aramco public. And so the possibility that they're blowing up the facilities to artificially create an oil shortage and drive the price back up occurred to a lot of people. But you don't do that when you're getting ready to put it up on the stock market. So it looks like something is going on very interesting. All right, another phone call. Nate in North Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks. I'm having problems, man. I'm really been having some really double plus ungood thoughts lately.
Okay.
And and one of them is I don't believe anything that the government tells me. So
well, you and George Carlin and yours truly.
Yeah, and I guess according to a official White Horse South, they're going to start coming after us. But I appreciate your website, but I was not able to find an article that you covered. Or it might not have been on your website. You might have just been with your all of the caveats that you're able to add to the current events. That you mentioned the how the government knew since the 1970s about the toxicity of nitrates.
Nitrites.
Was that on your? I didn't see that on your website. Was that just a freebie that you threw in? From
No, it was on the website, and I will go ahead and bump it up to the top of the front page, and we will get that up there for you, okay?
All right, and one more. This was a little bit longer ago. You mentioned about I think it was an orphanage over in Ireland where they found a lot of dead babies, and they were abused and things like that. And you reported that the government told this organization to destroy the evidence. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that, but that was a while ago. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to put my hands on that quickly.
Okay. Well, that was it's not my.
Well, there was even a movie that was made out of it about one of the children that was sold for adoption to American parents, and it starred Judi Dench, and it was based on a true story. And I forget the name of the movie, but this all really happened. All of these horrific stories are starting to surface, whether it's over there in Ireland, whether it's in the Canada's residential schools. And it's a very, very ugly situation that's been going on over there.
I remember when that story broke, and but I couldn't remember what country that was in. That was in Ireland. That was in Ireland,
yeah. And let's see, Philomena. That's the name of the movie. That's the name of the movie, spelled with a PH, and basically is based on a true story of this woman who was one of these orphans, sold to adoption to American parents, and went back trying to find her real birth parents and what happened to them. All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Nate, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, word is now coming out of the Defense Department that the U.S. is considering a permanent, ongoing naval deployment in the Mediterranean, primarily based on DDG guided missile destroyers out of Rota, Spain. Have them constantly on patrol, going on back and forth. This is more rattling of the sabers and basically a tantrum being thrown over the fact that they could not get Russia out of Crimea and their Black Sea warm water seaport. Now, to give you an idea of how much of a provocation this is, what would be the reaction of the U.S. government and the corporate media if Russia were tooling 4 destroyers around the Gulf of Mexico on a constant basis? So you understand what a provocation this really is if they go ahead with the plan. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Les in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Greetings from the Great White North. It's about oil that you were talking about earlier.
A little bit.
There's some other correspondence with that oil problem. Oil is also used in a lot of products. That kind of ties in with your Baltic Dry Index, too. So it's not just driving and a few other things. It's actually production of goods.
Yeah, plastics. There's all kinds of materials that are made starting with those hydrocarbons, and as people stop buying those products, again, it's a collapse of demand.
Yeah, that's all I had to say.
All right. Well, no, I appreciate that. Hey, Al Gore and his friends ought to be happy as all heck. The world's use of these carbon fuels is very much in decline. We have saved the planet from human-caused global warming. Of course, that's not what Al Gore and his buddies wanted. They want us using lots and lots of carbon and paying taxes on it. That was the real goal there. Okay?
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. We're going to switch over here to Alan in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi there, Mike. I just wanted to make a request, maybe if you can have that Wolfgang Helbig back on your show, maybe soon or something.
Okay.
I've been watching some recent stuff on him, and I had no idea that he had subpoenaed a lot of those people from Sandy Hook and went to like a city hearing there. A lot of the people didn't show up, the principal, the sheriff, but one of the superintendents did, and they were just drilling them on the condition of the school and this and that. And then I guess from what he was saying is that he has federal subpoenas for them to go to Florida in a federal hearing.
Yes.
And I just think that's incredible. I mean, I had no idea this guy was on fire like that.
Oh, well, yeah, he's definitely out there, and I hope he's got his Kevlar undies on. And, of course, the corporate media is going to ignore him, just as the corporate media ignores anybody who's got the goods on these endless series of deceptions and frauds and false flags coming out of the U.S. government.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, the amount of fraud there is just incredible. I didn't know that on even the FBI's they list per city how many people died per year. For the year 2012, they have Newtown at 0 deaths.
That's exactly right.
That's incredible. It's just like, you think by now they would have changed that, but
no, that would make it even more obvious that there was a cover-up going on. And it's like the BBC and Fox and CNN reporting on the collapse of Building 7 20 minutes before it actually happened. They just ignored it with dignity. You know, and anybody who asks about it, they just roll their eyes and sigh and say, well, you know, conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat, kook, wingnut, whatever.
Yeah, I was just wondering. I know that I was just wondering, maybe you knew there's a way. I guess he just goes off donations now because they've pretty much ruined his business that he had and stuff like that.
I can identify with that.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to maybe find out somewhere, maybe on your website, how to donate to his cause.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, I'll make a point of getting him back on. We're starting to basically go back through all of these false flags. The point that we are trying to make here is we have come to the end of the time where we waste our lives and energy and money and resources arguing over tiny details. The one thing we can all agree on is the government has lied to us on a massive scale. And now is the time when the people of the United States of America need to look themselves in the mirror and say, what am I going to do about a government that lies to me on such a scale? Do I really want my children growing up enslaved to a government that rules them with lies, fraud, and deception? It's time to confront that. It really is. Okay?
Yeah, I mean, all right. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, the Syrian army has captured the strategic town of Salma in Latakia. Now that they've got Russian air support and the U.S. is no longer allowed to go in there and bomb willy-nilly, they're making great strides. And the U.S. is still trying to figure out a way to get back on in there. Russia is calling for constitutional reform in Syria. Putin is trying to maintain the high ground of saying, yes, there's reason to change. Putin is still insisting that Assad be allowed to run for president again under the new constitution. The U.S. Tacitly went along with that, and then an internal memo was leaked saying absolutely not. They want Assad out. They want a U.S.-controlled puppet in. Now, meanwhile, the Syrian government is saying they're open to Geneva peace talks, but they will not talk to representatives of terrorist groups, meaning the U.S.-sponsored ISIS and al-Qaeda. They'll talk to the legitimate Syrian political opposition, but they don't see a reason why these outsiders who were brought in should be considered part of the planning of the new Syria. Now, as you know, the corporate media has made a big deal over the humanitarian crisis in Madaya, Syria, over the last week, and they have been caught repeatedly using old footage, pictures taken of people in other places, other times, trying to put forward this story of this tremendous humanitarian catastrophe and blaming it on Assad. Assad is starving his own people. That's the new version of the lie. It used to be Assad is gassing his own people. Well, we couldn't prove that, but Assad is starving his own people. We have to invade Syria and take it over to save those poor, starving people. And, of course, we know the U.S. government doesn't care about starving people, because they haven't done anything about all the starving American people in our streets, have they? So the hypocrisy is appalling. And all around the world, we are seeing angry people writing letters of complaint to their news network saying, look, we're sick and tired of all of this obvious anti-Syria propaganda using manufactured, fraudulent news stories. Everybody knows this is just another way to demonize Assad, to try and get him out of office and keep him out of office. Now, there is a crisis, and it has prompted the UN Security Council to hold an emergency meeting, but at this point, the finger of blame is actually going to Saudi Arabia for funding all these terrorists who surrounded Madaya and cut them off. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go, well, first of all, I want to make a follow-up here on this Syrian story. All this last 4 years, the U.S. has been bombing Syria. More recently, they've been bombing Syria. They've been telling us they're targeting ISIS and al-Qaeda, but they always seem to miss. And they hit food storage facilities, water supplies, power stations. Just really terrible, terrible aim with all those bombs. Syria's envoy to the United Nations has totaled it all up and said that the U.S. bombing of Syria has cost the Syrian government billions of dollars, destroying critical civilian and industrial infrastructure, exhausting the capability of the people, and to basically hinder post-war reconstruction. Because the U.S. government wants to make America great again. The only way they can do that is to bomb every other country on earth into rubble. Then we'll be number one again. See how that all works. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, not only bombing, but also giving the weapons for to the terrorists to do their own bombing. And if anybody looks at the drone footage, it's a disgrace.
It is.
You know, my head spins like Linda Blair on The Exorcist. You know, John Kerry is either got two John Kerrys roaming around, or the guy is not only getting on a plane saying one thing, but somebody's spiking his drink because when he gets off the plane, he says something else.
Well, that's more an artifact of John Kerry getting on the plane thinking he's going to win the debate with his counterpart in negotiations, and then when he doesn't, he has to make up a story on the flight back home to save face, and that's where a lot of that comes from. Kerry really thought he could go up against people like Lavrov and just bully them into submission, and it just isn't working. Nobody believes
John Kerry. Nobody believes the U.S. government anymore.
No, absolutely not. They keep breaking all their promises, breaking all their treaties. The U.S. government has destroyed its credibility internationally with other governments. It's destroyed its credibility with the American people. This is a government which really cannot function any longer. If there were a real crisis, something happening, a pandemic, an asteroid strike, whatever, this government couldn't get the American people to do what was necessary because everyone's going to sit back and say, it's just another hoax, just another fraud.
Mike, what's your take on these two Navy boats that were supposedly disabled?
I seem to have missed that one. Where did that happen?
I think it just happened. The Pentagon reported 2 Navy boats were seized by the Iranians and 10 Navy personnel were taken off. But now the Iranians are going to give them back. Something bizarre going on.
Okay, I will have to look into that. I actually missed that one during the show prep today.
And also on that RBS saying like to sell all your stocks, I think they just want everybody to sell their stocks so they can buy them up cheap.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter how cheap stocks are. If you're buying stocks in failing companies, it still doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, things are coming home to roost this year already, man.
Oh yeah, we're not going to get to the end of this year without a major upset.
Like they said in the stand, bring out your dead.
All righty.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go and switch over here to John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just want to mention, these new military moves by America. This move to the Mediterranean fleet costs money. The move to the Pacific, it's costing money.
Yes. Now, these 4 destroyers they're going to have on permanent patrol in the Mediterranean are already stationed in Spain. But, yes, it costs a lot of fuel oil to run those ships around the Mediterranean on a constant basis.
Yeah. What I want to mention is that in 1999, Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan said, we don't really want to win this war. We just want to keep America fighting till it goes bankrupt.
Exact same strategy that worked in Vietnam, exact same strategy that the U.S. employed against the Soviet Union. And it's kind of interesting. Putin is trying to basically create a new Vietnam situation inside Syria and possibly Iran, and the U.S. is hoping that they're going to be able to repeat Afghanistan. And it'll be interesting to see who blinks first. Personally, at this point, I don't think the U.S. has the economic resiliency to win a war of attrition compared to Russia.
Well, with this miserable run-up to Christmas sales, that's going to cost a lot of tax money that's not going to be collected. Food stamps costing a lot of tax money.
Well, what they're doing is they're filling the gap between tax revenues and what they're spending with more out-of-control borrowing. I mean, they basically took the debt ceiling off the U.S. government. The Federal Reserve is just printing up the stuff. They're spending it like crazy, and nobody's really looking at what the ultimate inflationary result is going to be. But that's what they're doing. They're just creating the money out of thin air and saying, this is the money for the war.
The last point I want to make, Turkey, they not only were they stealing Syria's oil, or if you like, purchasing it at a very low price from
No, ISIS was stealing it, and Turkey was the fence. Turkey was fencing it for them.
Right. But, well, unfortunately, the same thing happened in Aleppo. Aleppo was a big, if you like, manufacturing town for Syria. Unfortunately, they've stolen all the manufacturing machinery and equipment and shipped it over the border into Turkey.
Okay.
Now, there's a new twist to this war, but a lot of this war is economic
all wars are economic. All wars are, forget about humanitarian, forget about bringing democracy, forget about the will of God and Holy Crusade. All wars are about controlling wealth, other people's wealth.
All wars are bankers' wars.
All wars are bankers' wars. That's exactly right.
But I'm looking at things from if you like, from a perspective away from the American meme and media. And to me, this is America bankrupting itself. It can't go on.
It never could. I mean, that's the problem with private central banking. It cannot be perpetuated indefinitely. It produces more debt than money with which to pay the debt until finally the accumulated debt reaches a situation where it crashes the whole system. And that's where we are right now. And they're going to try and get out of the mess with a war because that's what worked the last 2 times.
Well, at the moment, with the Baltic Dry Index the way it is, manufacturing the way it is, both in China, America, and in Britain and France and, well, Europe, everywhere, the whole world economy is going into a massive decline. And I think within a couple of months we will see a major hiccup in the world's economies, individual economies. I think Britain is going to be one of the first to go.
Could very well be. We know that David Cameron is going to extraordinary lengths to try and push through the referendum to fully merge with the European Union. He's literally put, gag orders on his members of his own government. They're not allowed to speak out against the European Union merger. And that, of course, completely undermines the whole idea of there being a democratic government in Great Britain at all. So it's pretty okay. Anyway, listen, John, I need to let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break, so thank you very much for the information. I'm now seeing the story about the capture of these 2 U.S. Navy boats by Iran. Still trying to get the details about that. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're catching up on the news about this situation over in Iran, which is already resolved. That's the good news. Where apparently earlier today, 2 U.S. Navy boats, small craft, wandered into Iranian territorial waters, apparently by quite a large distance. The U.S. government is claiming they lost contact with the boats and didn't know where they were going to be. They were, of course, immediately intercepted by Iranian naval forces, and the crews taken off the boats. Now, 1 boat making a navigation error and going into Iranian waters, I can accept. 2, I rather doubt it. Being of a cynical disposition, I think these boats were ordered into Iranian waters in the hopes they would be fired on and give the U.S. an excuse to open up military action against Iran. But the Iranians have played it cool. They basically called up the U.S. State Department and said, this looks like an accident, innocent mistake. We're going to give you your people and your boats back. Because Iran knows the U.S. is trying to find an excuse to start a war, whether it was through Saudi Arabia and that whole Tehran embassy thing, and that really didn't get any traction. So now we're going to send our assets in there, and the Iranians will shoot at them, and then we'll have our excuse. And the Iranians are too smart for that. All right, let's go ahead and grab a phone call. John in Canada, thank you very much for waiting, and what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
By the way, there's nothing wrong with your cynical disposition.
Well, no matter how cynical I get, I can't keep up.
The reason I called is, I don't know, are you familiar with the Port Arthur massacre in Australia that led to the gun ban in Australia?
Yes, and I know that there's a lot of very weird circumstances about that have led many people to think it's another gun grabber false flag.
Absolutely. It's funny, I followed you for a long time, and also I followed a guy called Joe Veal, and he put out quite a lot of good stuff about 10 or so years ago, and he's since passed away.
Yes.
But I was going back through one of his old articles on Port Arthur, and I knew a lot about what had happened, the fact that the guy had like a 29 out of 30 kill ratio with his bullets. And the guy, obviously a professional, and they basically had a patsy called Martin Bryant, who is a mental deficient guy, and he's been locked up and being made incommunicado with the rest of the world. But I thought I knew everything about that story, and I was reading one of Joe's old articles, and this gave me chills because one of the things that tied Martin Bryant to that massacre was that they found his passport on the front seat of his car. And
oh, those amazing passports. Yes.
And I went, you know what, that's almost like a calling card to me nowadays. When something that blatant I mean, you know, the guy's going to go out and kill people, and he just manages and remembers to take his passport, and there's the common courtesy to leave it on the front seat of his car. I mean, you know.
I mean, that's ridiculous. If you're not actually planning on crossing a border, why would you take your passport out anyway? And second, if you're carrying your passport, why would you go through the bother of taking it out your pocket and leaving it on the seat? I mean, it doesn't pass the smell test.
No, I can send you that. It's quite a great story, and I can actually email that to you.
Please do.
It's really reminiscent of a lot of what's gone since, and that was in I think '96, and that resulted in every single semi-automatic in Australia being confiscated or handed in and crushed, and it worked. Of all the false flags that worked the advantage of the gun grabbers, that was perfect. It was carried off perfectly, and to this day, you know, it's almost impossible to get a semi-auto in Australia.
Well, you know what's interesting? Port Arthur worked because it was one of the first times they pulled this nonsense. I mean, there was an earlier one in Great Britain, one in California, but the people hadn't become aware that these things are very often false flags by the government to get the guns. Now, of course, it's happened so many times. Columbine, Sandy Hook, Boston Marathon, all of these, you know, stage shootings in the shopping malls and everything, the gun-free zones. At this point, everybody understands that's exactly what's going on. The government is going to go on murdering innocent bystanders until they can convince the public it's time to surrender your guns and rely on the police department to protect you in your home, even though the police departments are stealing more and killing more than the criminals are and the terrorists are. And it is an absolutely absurd situation. I mean, self-defense, I consider that to be an inalienable right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyway, Mike, I just thought I'd bring that one up. I will send you that story, and keep up the good work.
All right, thanks an awful lot, John. We're going to let you go. All right, now then, according to a Russian general, Sergei Rudskoy, chief of the main operations department of the Russian General Staff, new militants, meaning terrorists, are pouring into Syria's Latakia province, coming over the border from Turkey. That's their safe zone. That's where they can rest, have their wounds treated, be resupplied. Now, a story coming out of Rusvenia.su is up in Norway. Their foreign office has put together a report confirming the links between Turkish officers and ISIS. It doesn't get any more obvious than this. ISIS is the modern-day embodiment of Emmanuel Goldstein from 1984. And by the way, just last night, we happened to see the movie version of 1984 with Richard Burton and John Hurt. And it was kind of a little weird watching it and seeing just how incredibly close we are to that dystopian tyranny depicted in the book and in the movie. So it's out there on cable, and you might want to take a look at it because George Orwell wrote that book as a warning to the people. Unfortunately, too many of our leaders think it's an instruction manual. Now, over in Turkey, there's a crackdown on the media underway. 800 Turkish journalists have been fired last year, 150 thrown into jail. Now, Turkey is a NATO member, and therefore expects your sons and daughters to be killed and crippled to protect their way of life. Does that sound like a government that you think is worth sacrificing your child for? When they're acting like tyrants, when Erdogan comes out and said, Hitler, there's a manager for you. Meanwhile, over in Iran, Iran is complying with the requirements of the P5+1 over at the Iraq reactor, which was a big item on the list, has to be disabled. It is currently a heavy water reactor, which can be used to produce plutonium, and the Iranians agreed to disable it. The core has already been removed. Iran is going to retrofit that reactor for research purposes. Some of the P5+1 countries have committed to providing technical support, which is a good way to make sure that the reactor is not producing weapons stuff, like the one Israel still has down there in Dimona, And when I put this article up on my website, I put a little comment. Look for a last-ditch attempt to kill this deal and keep the Iranian sanctions in place. And I think this stunt with the 2 U.S. Navy boats was it. Because the government loves to play dirty. They think it's their divine right. Over in Ukraine, Kiev forces shelled Gorlovka, a civilian suburb, overnight. They're still completely in violation of the ceasefire and the Minsk Accords. Meanwhile, over in South Korea, U.S. troops have been placed on highest possible alert to guard against North Korea aggression. Well, the only provocations are coming from the South. But we can see how desperate the U.S. government is to get the world war going. And at this point, they don't even care where it starts. We'll start it with Iran. We'll start it with Korea. We'll start with China. We'll start with Monaco. Anybody who shoots back at us, and we'll get the war going, and everybody will forget about how the U.S. government destroyed the greatest nation on earth through greed, corruption, cronyism, private central banking. It's exactly what's going on. Okay. Now then, we should be coming up on a little bit of music here, I think. There it is. All right, we're going to take a break for news and our top-of-the-hour commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Mo in Florida. Thank you for being so patient. What's on your mind today?
Oh, Michael, you're worth waiting to talk to. I appreciate you taking my call. I just been looking at all of these false flags, like, since 9/11 and Vietnam, and I was thinking there's one thing that's different now. And after 9/11, it's hard to beat that act. But, there was no Internet back then. And when you look at what it takes, I think in 2008, there was some figure it would take $2 billion to harden this infrastructure against an EMP. And the very fact they haven't spent that pocket change, well, okay, say it's $5 billion now. The very fact that they haven't done that kind of indicates to me that might be the next act. Because if they did an EMP, I don't know what Russia would do. Maybe they'd tip Russia off and tell them, hey, don't do this because the nuclear missiles aren't affected by that.
Well, that's a little dangerous because to get an AMP, you have to loft the nuclear weapon outside the U.S. atmosphere, and everybody's radar is going to pick up on that, where it came from and where it's going to. And they don't need to use an AMP anyway. They could simply go into the routers and the backbone of the net and just crash it internally. A virtual 9/11, and they blame it on Iranian hackers or Chinese hackers or Russian hackers or Martha Stewart or whoever they felt like demonizing and going after that particular day. And it certainly is a real possibility. That's been a big part of what the U.S. military has been studying how to do, is how to take down the Internet anywhere on the globe, including here in the United States. I mean, if the U.S. government were to crash all of the Wall Street computers, they could then stand up and say, oh, golly, gee whiz, we were in an economic recovery, but those dastardly Japanese hackers destroyed everything. We don't know who owns what. We're just going to have to nationalize it all and start doling out allowances for you all to live on, and the government will own everything, blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's all kinds of ways they could take it. But they're not going to get their world war without some kind of a manufactured, contrived incident that will motivate the American people to be willing to support a new world war. At this point, given the intense distrust the American people have for the federal government as a whole, as revealed by polls, I don't think they can do it. I think they'd be foolish to try. But unfortunately, they're rather stuck. They've gone so far down this agenda of bringing the world back to Bretton Woods through force of arms, they can't turn around and reverse course, or the U.S. economy will implode immediately.
Well, must be a reason why they haven't hardened it, though. That's a good answer. But, I mean, for pocket change, they could have hardened it already. And I just, wonder why they haven't done it. But
well,
I appreciate your answer.
The problem with hardening the entire computer and power infrastructure against EMP, I think it's going to cost a lot more than $2 billion, although obviously if there were sort of the industrial equivalent of a surge suppressor every so many miles along the power lines, that would be pretty good. Most internet these days are optical, and it's immune from electromagnetic pulse. Where IMP is really going to cause a lot of problem are with these long cross-country high-tension lines, inducing huge overvolts in them. And I assume that somewhere along the way there are going to be sensors that will trip out. If you have surge suppressors and uninterruptible power supplies in your home for your computer, you're basically going to be immune. Battery-operated devices will not be harmed by electromagnetic pulse. It needs a really long wire in which a current surge can be induced.
Private power stations, all right?
Well, it depends on how well they're protected. It's like the Yellowstone eruption. I don't think it's going to be as spectacular as the movies make it out to be. The one known instance of IMP disruption happened here in Hawaii during the first exoatmospheric nuclear detonation. That's when they discovered IMP, and it basically created a lot of noise on the radio, and there were limited blackouts here on the islands, but it didn't absolutely take Hawaii back to the Stone Age.
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to switch over to Mark in Texas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Aloha. Mike, a couple of things about Donald Trump. The last debate, I think it was the last debate or the debate before that, he already confronted Bush pretty much about, letting the Bin Laden family leave the United States, and they were having dinner with HW at the Carlyle Group there in Boston. And the other thing is, his chief advisor, number one advisor, even though officially he's no longer part of the campaign, but I think that's done for a reason, is Roger Stone. And Roger Stone is big time into understanding what's going on. As a matter of fact, he's been on various shows already. I know he was in Alex Jones and he was in Breitbart also, saying that he thinks HW was involved not only in the assassination of Ronald Reagan, which I believe also, because
yes.
he was spotted there.
Yes.
Jesse Ventura showed that in his show, and also that he's involved with the attempted murder of Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
And that the Hinckley family, I knew this about the Hinckley family, was very close to Bush in the first place.
I think one of the Bush sons was supposed to have dinner with one of the Hinckleys that very night that Reagan was shot.
Wouldn't surprise me, just like having dinner at just at 9/11 going down, with the Bin Laden family.
Yeah.
I mean, this family is dirty, and I'm sure that him and Stone and Trump have discussed this already. I'm sure Trump is aware of it. I think he's just holding back some fire. He's keeping his powder dry and waiting to see what happens because, he's ready to unleash a lot of, he's ready to unleash hell on the establishment.
Well, and he doesn't want to tip his hand how much he's getting ready to do because that increases his personal danger. Like I said yesterday, Trump is trying to walk a very thin line. He understands that the independent media and the people who are aware of what's going on form a major part of his constituency, but at the same time he's being careful not to say something that is going to alienate all the sheep that still think the world is what they are being shown on the TV news reports every night. So, he's playing politics because he's running for president. But the other aspect, though, is that Trump does have a huge ego, and he may not listen to his advisors as much as he should be. But at the moment, his campaign is going strong. And, at this particular point, even the rank and file GOP, even the GOP leadership is saying that he is going to be the candidate.
I've heard some of them say that. At least. I don't know, whether they're accepting it or not yet. And another thing you got to watch is this clown, this really arch neocon, Bill Kristol.
Yes.
That he thinks that the Republicans should themselves run a third party. If they try that, I think we should make sure that the Republican Party is completely destroyed.
Well, at this point, the leadership of both parties needs to be changed because both of these party committees have gotten to a point of utterly disregarding their own delegates, their own supporters, their own voters, and have arrogated to themselves the right to decide who's going to be the candidate. Now, the official excuse given for stunts like the superdelegates is so that they don't wind up in another George McGovern situation where the voters voted for a loser, but we know that George McGovern was engineered to be Nixon's opposition during his reelection. That's what that whole Watergate situation was about. So they basically used it to grab more power to themselves to pick the candidates, which is a complete violation of what the whole electoral system in the U.S. is supposed to be. We're supposed to pick our own candidates, we're supposed to run them for office, and we're supposed to vote them in, not some central party committee getting out there and saying, we will choose the candidates for you. That's not democracy. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. Mark, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, if you look at the corporate media, you're going to see news about the economy, about it's a little dip, it's a stumble, nothing to worry about. Very obviously an upshove at the end of trading today to get the markets in the green in anticipation of Obama's State of the Union speech, in which he's going to say that the economic recovery is proceeding along. Meanwhile, of course, we have the RBS technical analysts are telling all their clients, get out of the stock market right now. The indicators away from the rigged, manipulated stock markets are flashing red warning signs. And if you go back and you study the crash in 1929, you will see a great deal of parallels. And I'm familiar with the history of what happened in 1929 because years ago when I was still working in film, I worked on the TV movie version of The Day the Bubble Burst, which was a book authored by William Hupt, who had been there on the trading floor when it all came apart. And it was a very well-researched book. I'd actually bought and read the book before I even got called to work on the film. So that was kind of a lot of fun. And I got to meet William Hupt on the set, and he still had that last piece of ticker tape from the losses framed. He was showing it around. He was telling us all these stories. And there was a tremendous diversity of opinion among all these big financial corporations as things started to come unglued. Some were saying, time to get out. Others were saying, no, ride it out. Show some courage. It'll be okay. And so you have to look at all these warning signs and decide for yourself what's going on. And Hupt related this story about one of his friends on Wall Street was riding up to work in the elevator, and the elevator operator, because this was in the days before computerized elevator control, they actually paid somebody to stand there and run the elevator, and the elevator operator was talking about his own stock portfolio and how much he had on margin, and there was just something about this individual who clearly wasn't making enough money to have risk capital to play with, talking about the stock market, that just freaked out the trader. And he went up to his brokerage and he said, dump it all, liquidate it right now. And he beat the crash by less than a week and got out with most of his and his clients' wealth intact. So when the thundering herds start stampeding, it's all going to be going on out. But again, back in 1929, the corporate media was telling Mr. and Mrs. America, everything's fine. Leave your money in the stock market. It's just a small hiccup, because they'd had a little crash in August of that year. Not a problem. Everything's going to be fine. Leave your money there. Don't panic. It'll all work out. Then the margin calls hit and destroyed everybody. So what are the actual indicators? Well, over in Great Britain, industrial output plunges the most in almost 3 years. It's not just China that's seeing a manufacturing slowdown. And again, for the same reason. It doesn't make any sense to manufacture products or grow produce unless somebody somewhere is ready to buy them. And that's the part that's broken down. As all the wealth has become concentrated in the 0.1%, ordinary people like you and I, we've got nothing left to work with. Every bit of money that comes into our pockets immediately goes out for food, rent, skyrocketing medical costs, fees, taxes. We don't have money to go down to the shopping malls and buy the products that are there for sale. So the shopping malls don't need to place new orders for manufacturing, whether it's China or Great Britain or Germany. The manufacturers don't need to buy more raw products, raw materials to make those products. It's all interlinked and it's all grinding to a halt. Now, Obama is out there insisting that the U.S. economy is the strongest in the world by far. I'm not sure exactly how he defines that, because we're certainly one of the most indebted in the world. And this is obviously going to be his talking point for the State of the Union speech. It's his last State of the Union speech. This is where he's going to be trying to establish his legacy, his place in the history books, how Barack Obama led the nation out of what may turn out to have been history's longest depression. But we're not out. Now, over at deviantinvestor.com, very interesting article, and they're talking about Michael Burry. Now, Michael Burry is the real-life version of the character in the current film, The Big Short. And Burry is out there saying that normally in a healthy economy and an unmanipulated marketplace, interest rates function as part of the risk pricing. The riskier an investment, the higher the interest you will pay on the money that you're using. It's part of risk management. But he says because of all the quantitative easing and the holding down of interest rates by the Federal Reserve, the risk pricing mechanism has become broken. And yes, the Federal Reserve is creating all this new money for the brokerages to buy up stocks as fast as anybody is dumping them, but they're buying up stocks with little, if any, underlying value. The market is hideously overvalued at this point. Barclays is coming on out saying that oil will descend below $30 a barrel. And everybody is scrambling what they're going to do about that. British Petroleum is cutting 20% of their North Sea workforce, part of a larger reduction where they're letting 4,000 people go. And the Baltic Dry Index has collapsed to yet another all-time record low, 402. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call real quick. Steve in Alabama. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Love your show. I was wondering about Obama's M.O. You know, when he did his amnesty executive order, you know, he got ready to be sued in court. Well, it come down that he hadn't signed it. And then it was the same thing with the Iran deal that, you know, it was never signed. And I'm wondering if he's done the same thing with this gun order, that they're just lying to the public, making them think that he's breaking the Constitution, and he's not actually breaking the law. He's just trying to make people think he is. I mean,
well, if any federal authorities conduct any kind of operations, gun seizures or whatever on the basis of Obama's claim and it's not valid, I mean, there are serious repercussions for those federal officers because they're not carrying out a real law. You know,
did you read that he didn't sign the amnesty thing, that it was just, you know, they couldn't sue him because he never signed it, or he never filed it, he never signed it? Same thing with Iran, the Iran deal.
Could very well be.
They never signed anything.
Could very well be. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Steve, thank you very much. We'll be back after these few words. Hey, aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economy. Now, let's look at what's been going on over the last 3 months. The government and the media want you to focus exclusively on the stock market and judge the entire economy by the fact that it ended in the green very late in the day, an obvious upshove. But if you look at the other stock issues, the ones that are not part of that market calculation, they're doing very bad. In the last 3 months, the only sector of our economy to show any growth is technology services by 0.5%, 0.55% to be exact, over the last 3 months. Communications, down by 0.18%. Consumer non-durables declined by almost 0.5%. Retail trade down by 1.35%. Utilities down by 1.72%. Finance down 5%. Health services down 6%. Electronic technology down 7%. Commercial services down 7%. Consumer durables down almost 9%. Transportation down almost 14%. Energy minerals down 15%. The indicators are all looking really bad. And to top it all off, we have 45 million Americans who are now on food stamps. That's 20% of the population. And when the free government money stops flowing, you're going to have 45 million very angry Americans. Back in 1969, there were less than 3 million Americans on the food stamp program. Now it's 45 million. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. Francis in Canada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk a bit now about Ted Cruz. And there's a rather interesting story that's come out through CNN. And the Washington Post, Kathleen Park, has said the following, quote, I don't think there's any chance Cruz can win the election, and here's why. One observation, I don't know. This seems to have slipped through the cracks a little, but Ted Cruz said something I found rather astonishing. He said, you know, it's time the body of Christ rise up and support. I don't know anyone who takes their religion seriously who would think Jesus should rise from the grave and resurrect himself to serve Ted Cruz. I know so many people who are offended by that comment. You know, if you want to talk about grandiosity and messianic self-imagery, Ted Cruz makes Donald Trump look rather sort of like a little lamb.
Okay, Francis, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we have got a real problem with the phone connection. You're cutting in and out. You sound like an old Johnny Mathis record. I got the gist of what you're saying, and if you would do me a favor and send me a URL for an article that talks about that claim. Now, as far as I'm concerned, despite being promoted heavily by the corporate media, Ted Cruz cannot legally run for President of the United States under the rules of the Constitution. Period. End of discussion. But if he's really out there talking about the second coming of Jesus to help his administration, that's almost getting on down to about as crazy as Carson was, you know, about storing grain in the pyramid.
Yep. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Okay, now then, finishing up with the economy, record number of retired Americans are now having to work part-time jobs as the cost of living soars way past their pensions, Social Security, their 401ks. We are in a situation right now where the U.S. government has no money for social programs for the people who paid that money in, but they got plenty of money to burn on the military. $1.3 trillion for the F-35. It's a piece of junk. Going to spend $2 billion upgrading the Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines. No money to take care of the veterans. No money to make good all the borrowing from the Social Security Trust Fund. All right, we're going to skip on down here and get into the election season news. Now, Fox Business News has come out with the lineup for the next GOP debate, and Rand Paul and Carly Fiorina did not make the cut for the main debate. Rand Paul is throwing a tantrum saying that he will not take part in the secondary debate. He's not going to do it. Rand Paul was hoping to ride his father's reputation into the White House, but Rand has repeatedly proven he is not his father's son politically, especially with his constant sucking up to Israel. As for Carly Fiorina, anybody familiar with her tenure at Hewlett-Packard knows she is not competent to run a corporation, let alone an entire nation. Now, we reposted our article to the front of WhatReallyHappened.com on why Ted Cruz is not eligible to be President of the United States, the legal meaning of natural-born citizen. And as it turns out, the same also applies to Marco Rubio. Now, Rubio isn't that much of a player. He's still in the running, but he's not really going anywhere. But they're trying to promote Ted Cruz over Donald Trump. And he can't hold the office. And so this is a call to Rivero's Rangers to grab that article. Ted Cruz is not eligible to be president of the United States, and forward it to everybody that you know. Make it go viral. We've had way too many politicians, way too many presidents who don't think the Constitution has any bearing on their conduct. And that's a dangerous situation because that Constitution is there to protect you, the American people, from an abusive central government. Interesting news out of Arizona. Former State Senator Kelly Ward is running against John McCain in the August primary, and she thinks that she's got a chance to defeat him because McCain has fallen out of favor with many in the conservative wing. His old scandals are coming back to haunt him. That would be definitely interesting to see. McCain finally get kicked out here. Now, Barack Obama has made an announcement. He is refusing to endorse any Democratic candidate. He's saying you, the voters, will have to make up your own mind. This is a major blow to the Hillary Clinton campaign, which was absolutely counting on Obama's support, in part because of how Hillary supported Obama after she abandoned her career back in 2008. But there are persistent rumors that Obama may throw Hillary under the bus this year. Partly it's payback for Hillary's trying to steal the 2008 election. Partly it's because Obama made Hillary Secretary of State in exchange for her support in 2008, only to have Hillary turn the State Department into a major headache and embarrassment for the Obama administration. And finally, pardon me, Obama realizes that if Hillary gets into the White House, citizen investigations are going to continue into some major scandals damaging to the entire government, such as the covert U.S. support for ISIS and al-Qaeda, the scale of the corruption involving the Clinton Foundation and the State Department, and the still unasked question of whether Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State was selling U.S. secrets to foreign powers in exchange for donations to her charitable foundation. If Hillary loses the election, interest in what she has done will fade, Obama thinks. Move On has just endorsed Bernie Sanders. Now, the latest polls coming out of Iowa and New Hampshire show that Hillary Clinton's lead over Sanders has evaporated. More when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the campaign for the White House. We're less than 3 weeks away from the start of the caucuses and primaries, so things are really beginning to heat up. And the current polls coming out of both Iowa and New Hampshire are showing that Hillary Clinton's support is beginning to crumble. Her lead over Bernie Sanders has all but vanished, which means we can expect a miraculous come-from-behind victory in the caucuses, putting Hillary in the lead, and the fact that the official results don't match the exit polls is because the voters are lying to the exit pollers, which is what they did back in 2008. Hillary's apparently worried enough where she's gone onto attack mode against Bernie Sanders. And I'll bet Bernie Sanders is going to change his mind about not wanting to hear any more about those gosh darned emails. And it would serve Hillary right. Hillary is in decline. She's taking Debbie Wasserman Schultz with her. There's growing pressure within the Democratic committee for Schultz to step down. She's practically bankrupted the Democratic Party. And she's made no secret of the fact that she has decided Hillary Clinton will be the candidate this year. And there are some differing opinions within there. And of course, Schultz is also a hardcore Israel firster. So this may be the beginning of this out with the old and in with the new anti-incumbency, anti-Israel firster fever that I expect to sweep the nation. Now then, yesterday we were talking about close-ups of Hillary Clinton's eyeglasses showing the left lens with these vertical lines indicating what's called a Fresnel prism. which is designed to allow the field in that eye to be shifted artificially, indicating that without the glasses, Hillary Clinton has double vision. And it may indicate some serious damage from her fall and her concussion. And now, apparently, a spokesperson for the Hillary Clinton campaign is saying, yes, Hillary is wearing a Fresnel prism, and it is related to the head trauma she suffered. So on top of everything else, the Democrats' chosen nominee may have suffered brain damage. And Hillary was not a very nice person even when she had all of her marbles. By the way, little interesting note, as you're probably already aware, the FBI claims to be expanding their investigation into possible corruption related to Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State and the Clinton Foundation. May prove to be a little more difficult than they expected, because it turns out the Clinton Foundation was created in Canada, which is going to make it more difficult for American investigators to get inside and look at what's been going on. Hillary is also out there calling for an end to immigration raids. She's hoping all these illegal immigrants and refugees are going to be Democratic voters by November. Maybe, maybe not. This could backflash on her. Over in Germany, following Merkel's admission that the refugee crisis is out of control, protesters are rampaging through a German town, destroying ethnic restaurants and takeaways. Sexual assault is on the rise in Germany, which is amazing. I didn't realize Bill Clinton was visiting Berlin. Story out of RIF.com. Crime is surging in Germany from the new refugees. Even the New York Times has come on out and said it's time for Germany to close their borders, start conducting mass deportations, and it's time for Angela Merkel to step down. Merkel is going to skip attending the Economic Forum in Davos, dealing with the aftermath of the attacks in Cologne. Story out of Russia Today, the German police is saying that law enforcement in Germany can't tackle the problem because every time they try and arrest a refugee, they're denounced as being racists, profiling. They're being ordered to keep the statistics looking favorable to protect that blend the world together agenda. Up in Sweden, the police have been caught covering up the amount of sex abuse going on. This plan to create a single human population with no sense of self or identity is blowing up in their face. Europe's Schengen system is on its deathbed. The European Union is already in trouble because of the European Central Bank, but it may fragment and collapse over the refugee crisis even before the economic chickens come home to roost. All right, we're going to take ourselves a phone call. Tony in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. How are you?
Doing good.
Good. You know, I want to talk about the refugees going into Europe. I was thinking, you know, a lot of the immigration in the U.S., which is pretty much a corporation. I shouldn't say pretty much. It is a corporation. In my opinion, it's all designed to dilute the labor pool and cheapen labor. That's why all politicians say they're against it. When it comes down to it, you know, they bow down to corporations, which want cheap labor.
I don't think that's a big factor for a very, very simple reason. These refugees and illegal immigrants who are pouring into all these countries, including our own, do not have marketable skills. That's why at the same time we have this flood of refugees and illegal immigrants coming into the United States, corporations are hammering that H-1B visa program to bring in skilled, trained workers from other countries. Because what's coming across the border, they're really not useful for anything at all other than things like gardening and picking up the trash. But they're not skilled bridging engineers. They're not skilled road engineers. They don't know how to rewire the traffic lights or anything like that. And so I don't think that's as much of a factor. It may have been back when we had closer to full employment and they wanted to pull the wages and salaries down, but we've already got 90 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find real jobs for years.
I agree with that, but in Europe, there are several articles from Germany that a lot of these immigrants are working now as journeymen, apprentices, and the owners of these small companies are saying what a boon it's been for their business because they've had a hard time finding laborers that are willing to learn. So it is a crisis over there. Probably there's been going on here a lot longer, obviously, with the Mexican immigrants. But the Mexican immigrants do a lot of construction. They work in a lot of restaurants. It's a service-based economy that we have now, and a lot of the people working in the service industry are Mexican immigrants in this country.
Yeah, but you see, there's a problem. There's a problem with the so-called service economy. It's trying to prosper a nation by doing each other's laundry for a fee. And it may open up additional tax opportunities for the government, but it doesn't produce saleable products that can be exported to other countries to reduce the trade imbalance. And that's why when the service economy was foisted on us back in the 1980s to cover up for the loss of manufacturing, it was a short-term solution. It looked good. We don't need to make products. We can do services for each other. But the net result has been a continuing decline in the standard of living of the average American worker because no new wealth is being brought into the system, and the top of the pyramid continues to suck wealth out of the bottom. And that's why we have got this incredibly unbalanced situation right now.
Right. I think it's by design. That's why I think
I don't think so. I think it's by short-sightedness, greed, and just not really thinking in the overall view. And it gets back to that Adam Smith myth that being greedy for yourself is good for society as a whole, even though Nobel Prize-winning mathematician John Nash, in his doctoral dissertation, proved that was wrong. That what was best for the system as a whole is considering the system as a whole when you make your economic decisions.
Right. Well, these people making decisions don't think about the economy or the people as a whole.
That's why they want to continue to worship at the altar of Adam Smith, because it justifies a lot of recklessness and personal greed. And that's what's gotten us into this mess. Okay?
Right. All right.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up on the top of the hour in our interview with Dr. Kevin Barrett. And meanwhile, up in Oregon, real quick, the people holding that facility are now going through all the files, and they say they're uncovering evidence to support the claim that the Bureau of Land Management has been engaging in fraud and deception to steal land away from the ranchers. And so there's already a judge on the way up there. There may be a legal action about to happen, and they're avoiding violence, and that is going to be a real good thing. So we're going to take a break here for our top of the hour news and some commercials, and we'll be back with Dr. Kevin Barrett after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and joining us on Skype right now is Dr. Kevin Barrett, who's got a brand new book out. Kevin, thank you for spending time with us today.
It's great to be back with you, Mike. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. How time flies when you're trying to stop a world war. So let's just get right into it. Tell us all about your new book and where they can get it. I put the link up to the book page at WhatReallyHappened.com, but give us an overview of what the book is about.
Well, this book is called Another French False Flag, ? Bloody Tracks from Paris to San Bernardino. And so it's the second in my 2015 Big Paris False Flag series. The first one was called We Are Not Charlie Hebdo, Free Thinkers Question the French 9/11. That came out on March 1st. And so both of these books came out less than 2 months after the big terror attacks that they discuss, and they kind of instantly take them apart and expose them as false flags with the help of a total of over 40 leading public intellectuals who jumped on this so quickly. If people had exposed 9/11 this quickly, we would be in a much better world today. So we really need to mobilize, act fast, and push back against these false flags. And you've been doing this for a long time, Mike. And so I'm just kind of doing it in a different form here by putting out these sort of semi-scholarly books very quickly after the false flags happen.
Okay, well, let's talk about the first one and Charlie Hebdo, and give us some of the high points that made it obvious to you and will make it obvious to your readers that it was a false flag.
Well, I think the simplest way to convince yourself that there's a real problem with the story of what happened at the Charlie Hebdo magazine offices is to look at the video of the alleged shooting of the police officer on the sidewalk in the immediate aftermath of the Charlie Hebdo shooting. And that you see these guys, dressed in black, these ninja terrorists going down the sidewalk, pulling out an AK-47, and we are told by the French government and the media, shooting a police officer who's lying on the sidewalk, point blank in the head with the AK-47. The only issue here is that the head doesn't react whatsoever. There's no blood, and a little bit of dust is kicked up on the sidewalk a meter away from the guy's head. It's obvious that what we're seeing is somebody pretending to shoot the guy, but actually shooting a blank round into the sidewalk a meter away from the cop's head. Now, if they staged a fake shooting on the sidewalk right after the shooting in the Charlie Hebdo offices, that kind of raises questions about what happened in those offices, and it raises questions about the whole event. So that's the first thing I would point to. And then the second is the statement by the French, Minister of the Interior, Bernard Cazeneuve, that the only reason they caught these two brothers who did it was because they dropped an ID card in their abandoned getaway car. And if you believe that, I have a lot of great stuff to sell you.
Well, again, we had a caller earlier in the show about, why are you taking your passport with you? And if you're taking it with you, why are you taking it out of your pocket and just leaving it someplace where it could get lost? It really doesn't make sense. And I remember that video that you're talking about and how just a day after everybody pointed out, you could see the bullet was hitting the sidewalk and not the guy's head. They released a new version that was blurred, and all the earlier versions were Orwellized. So, they were basically being reactive to the growing realization that it was all staged hoax.
Yeah, they're really doing these things, and it looks to me like they're getting more sloppy as time goes on. And I don't know why that is. You would think they would be getting better at it, but, some people even think that maybe there's a certain intentionality in that they want to sort of rub our noses in the fact that they've got impunity and that the media is going to cover for them no matter what they do.
Well, for the most part, up until now, the media has covered for them, and they maintain the lies and illusions, but all they succeeded in doing is destroying the credibility not only of the corporate media, but of the underlying government as well.
Well, that's right. And this time around, I saw, Mike, there was a huge reaction, a public reaction and interest in the material about how these were false flags. For example, I wrote a piece on the Paris event of Friday the 13th. I wrote that piece just hours after it happened. I actually flew out of Paris on the 13th and got to Chicago that evening, and the event had just started happening in Paris, so I missed it in Paris by a few hours. And on the bus home from O'Hare Airport to Wisconsin, I wrote this first reaction saying it already looks pretty dubious, and posted that, and that was headlined "Another French False Flag?" ? And it got 6 figures worth of reads almost instantly. And then I did the same thing when the San Bernardino follow-up happened, and that one shot up to over 300,000 reads almost instantly. So there are a lot of people out there interested in false flags.
Well, it's not a question of being interested. It's a question of being aware, because, false flags are a fact of history, but it's a fact of history not taught in the public schools because they're very useful, but they stop being useful if the general public is aware that governments play these kind of dirty tricks on their own people. But now, because of the independent media and the Internet, the general public is now aware of these tactics governments use to deceive us, including false flag attacks and propaganda tricks and the rest of it. And so now the general public is more sophisticated. They understand these things happen on a regular basis. We've had evidence surface about previous false flags in history. We've got a list of dozens of false flags that are actually officially admitted to by the governments that played them on their own people. And for every one that they're admitting to, we can assume that there's 20, 30, or 100 that are still clinging to the official story.
Well, that's right. In some cases, they're not only admitted to, but the governments brag about them. And, one example of that would be the Lavon affair. That was when the Israelis blew up American targets in Egypt in the early 1950s and tried to blame it on the Egyptians. And they got caught. And they kept saying for decades that actually they were innocent and that it was all a big anti-Semitic hoax. But then, right around the time of 9/11, actually, the Israeli government officially admitted that it had indeed conducted these false flag attacks against U.S. targets in Egypt, and they lavished honors on the undercover agents who had conducted those attacks. They gave them medals, So that's one step beyond admitting it. That's bragging about it.
Yeah, definitely. And we know that here in the United States, there was a program, Operation Northwoods, that was going to try and justify a new invasion of Cuba by shooting down an American airplane and framing Cuba for it. That would have led to nuclear war. Dick Cheney actually proposed building fake Iranian gunboats and using them to attack our forces in the Gulf to justify war on Iran. That's how these things get done. All war is based on deception, if you've read Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And if you really think about it, false flags become inevitable when you realize the people of a country really don't want to go to war. It's dirty, disgusting, difficult, ill-paid work, and there's a real risk you could lose important bits of your body. So anytime a leader of a nation wants to initiate a war, they have to find some way to lie or trick their people into it so that they think there's no other option than going to war. Hitler did it with the Gleiwitz incident. Woodrow Wilson did it with the sinking of the Lusitania, which was loaded with weapons, contrary to the official story. Same thing with Roosevelt goading Japan for an entire year to carry out the attack on Pearl Harbor and then acting like it was a big unexpected surprise. False flags are not a rare occurrence. They're business as usual for government, and that includes right up to the current day with 9/11 and outright lies like Saddam's nuclear weapons. That's just how government does it, and it's time for the American people to wake up and realize they live under a government that lies to them to get what the government wants.
That's right. And if any of your listeners doubt this, and I would think if they've been listening to you very long, they won't, but if they do, they should go on the search engine and find that YouTube of Patrick Clawson, that's Clawson, of the WINEP, Washington Institute of Near East Policy. And he admits that this is how it's done. He calls for a false flag targeting Iran to launch a war in Iran. And he goes over the history of these false flags that have launched U.S. wars and basically admits that's how we do it. That's the traditional way we go to war, and that's what we need to do against Iran. So it's not like they're really even hiding this anymore. And I think that they're losing their effectiveness bit by bit.
As the public becomes aware of it. Okay. Kevin, we got to take a 4-minute break for commercials. We'll be right back with Kevin Barrett and his books on Charlie Hebdo and San Bernardino. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Dr. Kevin Barrett. He's authored a great many books, but the 200 discussion is one that came out early last year regarding the Charlie Hebdo false flag, and we're talking about that one. And he's got the new book out that is basically carrying forward to the events that we saw in San Bernardino. So we're talking about obvious signs of fakery, the costumed terrorist shooting the ground with an AK-47, and then we're told that he actually shot the police officer, which doesn't appear to have been the case. What are some other real obvious aspects of the Charlie Hebdo case that really sing out it's a hoax?
Well, one of them was the direction that these guys chose to flee. It was highly improbable that they actually could have taken the getaway route that we're told that they did. But so where did they go? They went straight to the main Jewish neighborhood of Paris, which is kind of a weird place to flee to if you're a radical Muslim terrorist who's just shot a bunch of people. And they dumped their car off right in front of a little place called Pâtisserie, which is a sort of a bakery cafe that happens to be the headquarters for the extremist Zionist movement in France. Every year at Pâtisserie, they have a huge bash celebrating the success of the IDF at murdering Palestinians. So right in front of what passes for the unofficial Jewish Defense League terrorist headquarters in Paris, these alleged radical Muslim terrorists dropped off their getaway card, or dropped off the car, threw down an ID card, and hijacked another car. So that getaway route is very bizarre. Now, who were these guys, these Kouachi brothers that they blame for doing this? Well, they had a long history. They were on the radar screens of all the intelligence services. They were playing at being jihadis, only they weren't at all Islamic. Like almost every perpetrator of every so-called radical Islamic terror attack, these guys were party-hardy playboys and drug users. They had both been busted for child pornography, and then the arrests went away, just disappeared, which means they were obviously recruited as intelligence agents or informants or assets. And they had travel on their passports that couldn't have happened, like they supposedly went through Israel and then on to Middle Eastern countries that you can't get into if you have a passport stamped from Israel. It was obvious that their passports were just stamped in an intelligence cover operation to make it look like they had traveled to Yemen and all of these places to join up with Al-Qaeda here and ISIS there. So their background was completely ridiculous. And then there's another really interesting video of the third terrorist. Now, we were told there were 3 terrorists at Charlie Hebdo right away. Instantly, Cazeneuve, the interior minister, knew there were 3 terrorists, but there weren't. There were only the 2 Kouachi brothers, supposedly, those 2 guys in the getaway. But then, 2 days later, suddenly there's a follow-up incident, and there's a shooting in this bakery, or rather this kosher deli. And a guy named Koulibaly was blamed for that, an African Muslim immigrant. Now, the video of him being shot by police through the window of this kosher deli shows that he appears to be handcuffed.
I remember seeing that.
Yeah. So that blows away the official story of the heroic rescue of the hostages in there. So there's all sorts of indications on that. But, we're talking so much about Charlie Hebdo, which was back in, a year ago. And this new book, Another French False Flag, is really about what happened on Friday the 13th.
Okay, before we get into it, though, I feel we need to make a point. The Charlie Hebdo case was all about freedom of speech and how dare you criticize Charlie Hebdo, for doing offensive cartoons about Muslim. But if you look at what they've been putting out during their entire career, they're insulting everybody, Christians, Jews. It's really offensive stuff. I can't imagine why anybody would actually buy that magazine because we had some of that. But what's really...
It was going out of business.
That's right. It was going out of business. Now, all of a sudden, they had a huge amount of money poured all over them because of this horrible tragedy. But what's really interesting is in the name of freedom of speech, France has enacted absolutely draconian laws controlling freedom of speech. And it's okay to go on out and insult Muslims all you want, but you better not criticize Israel. And far from, striking a blow for liberty and freedom of speech, France has gone, the government has gone completely the other way. And they're just shutting it down.
Yeah, that was insane, wasn't it? They got millions of people marching in the streets supposedly for free speech and free expression and mourning the deaths of these cartoonists and martyrs. And most of those people in the street, they were all carrying exactly the same signs. They were printed with black backgrounds. Now, who prints a sign with black backgrounds? You'll go broke if you do that from your printer. Somebody provided millions of identical signs and identical fonts saying, Je suis Charlie. Somebody sponsored a very expensive social media campaign, so the hashtag went mega viral. The whole country was marching like lemmings for supposed free speech. And just in a couple of days after this event, the French police made more arrests of people for political expression than ever before. They arrested more than 50 people within a few days. They arrested the most celebrated comedian in France, or the most famous and notorious anyway, Dieudonné, for tweeting a joke. And now, after the second false flag, they've put France on a permanent state of emergency. So France is no longer a constitutional democracy thanks to these false flags.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to San Bernardino.
Yeah, same thing. One thing that really has to jump out at you, Mike, is that the drills, every time it seems like these these events coincide with drills that mimic exactly the events that we're told happened. In Paris on Friday the 13th, we learned from Patrick Pelloux, who's a very dubious character who was tied in with Charlie Hebdo as well, and who calls up the president of France apparently every time there's a big false flag. He admitted that they were running multiple shooter drills all day on Friday the 13th, mimicking exactly what happened that evening. And over in San Bernardino, we're told that this facility that was targeted by the terrorists had an active shooter training drill every single month. Now, how many facilities for handicapped people are likely to have an active shooter training drill every month? And that just happens to be the one where it happens. And guess what? It wasn't a brown-skinned Muslim couple that did it, according to multiple eyewitnesses. It was 3 big, burly, white paramilitaries that did the shooting. So in all of these cases, it looks pretty transparent. The mainstream media attempts at debunking are incredibly ludicrous and lame. And yet we can't seem to get traction in the court system.
Well, it's rather interesting because I saw one of the corporate media broadcasts where one of the eyewitnesses, just came and said it was 3 white guys, tall, athletic, and the newscaster felt compelled to say, well, obviously this eyewitness is very confused and mistaken because we know it was this Muslim couple. And you're absolutely right about the drills being there. The tube bombing in London on 7/7 was an ongoing drill simulating a tube bombing. We know that FEMA was on the ground in New York at the World Trade Towers the night before it all came down. And these drills are how they managed to have all the assets in position to immediately take control of the scene so that nobody gets in there and sees something they shouldn't.
That's absolutely right. And there were some really interesting questions with this Paris event about what actually happened. And at the Bataclan Theater in particular, there's hardly any social media photo or video evidence about what happened there, or even in the other places as well. There's a bizarre paucity of actual
when you
social
consider
media
how
evidence.
ubiquitous cell phones are. Okay, we got to take another 4-minute break for commercials. We'll be back with Kevin Barrett and all these false flags after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Kevin Barrett about his new books. We're talking about all these false flags and hoaxes and deception the government uses to control you, to deny you your civil rights. And again, for people of my age, we all remember the abuses of the FBI's COINTELPRO program back in the 1960s, trying to derail the civil rights movement, trying to derail the early feminists, trying to derail the Native American movement, and obviously always constantly trying to disrupt the anti-Vietnam War movement. They pulling dirty tricks like the Black Panther coloring book. They're notorious for that one. The staged hippie riot at Disneyland. This is how the government controls you and tricks you, and they're still doing it today. Fortunately, the American people are a lot wiser than they were back in the 1960s. Pardon me. And that's why trust in the government and the corporate media is an all-time low. Opinion of polls are showing the government. In fact, there was a Gallup poll came out a week ago where the American people see the federal government as the biggest danger in this country right now. So getting on back to San Bernardino, we know that the eyewitnesses' description of the shooters did not match the designated patsies. Well, go on and give us some more of the information that you've uncovered.
Well, I thought it was interesting that David Chesley, who was the attorney for the family of the Muslim couple that were the patsies, came right out and said that the government's account doesn't add up. And this was kind of a first, because in most previous cases, we get things like in the case of the Boston bombing, the court-appointed lawyer was a specialist in stringing up her clients.
Yes.
And so she basically got Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who was obviously innocent, since we know that this was actually done by Kraft International operatives, and the photo evidence for that is quite strong. But she had her client railroaded and sentenced to death.
She went to the jury and said he did it. What kind of a defensive...
What kind of lawyer is that?
She should be disbarred for that, Oh.
Yeah. Well, she's the same lawyer who railroaded the Unabomber.
Yes.
Ted Kaczynski wanted to put on a real defense, and she apparently was part of a government effort to just hammer him into submission and force him to take a guilty plea. And so she's obviously a made woman working for the bad guys. But here, this David Chesley, who somehow was representing the family of the patsies, came right out and basically called it a false flag and compared it to Sandy Hook. So, of course, the media didn't quite know what to do with that, but they had to report it. So that was interesting. Another aspect that he pointed to was that the Patsy couple was found dead in handcuffs.
Yes.
And the story that they were killed in a shootout doesn't add up, because the windows were all blown out from the front. They were supposedly shot while fleeing, but it looks like they were just kind of executed, and perhaps even executed while in handcuffs, which would really raise questions about the official story. And even the mainstream media is saying there's a huge mystery about what happened during the 20 minutes between the shooting and when these guys were located. And then we have, of course, the usual Israeli connection. We learned just a few days ago that the brother of the male patsy and the third man, this third guy who's been arrested for having provided the weapons, both of those guys are married to a pair of very dubious Russian-Israeli sisters. So in these kinds of events, patsies tend to get set up by somebody who's sort of running them.
Yes.
And it kind of looks like these Russian-Israeli sisters might be involved in the running of these assets, who then became patsies. Another interesting thing about this, Mark, or Mike, we were told that the 100-pound, 5-foot-tall woman, who's this super terrorist, was armed with body armor, Smith & Wesson .223 assault rifle, reloading clips, a handgun, a pipe bomb, a detonator, and then she's firing, and at the same time she's firing, she's tweeting her allegiance to Islamic State. We're told that tweet showed up 1 minute after the shooting began. A pledge of allegiance to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi appears on Facebook 1 minute after the shooting starts.
They did the same thing in Philadelphia. The shooter came up, shot the officer 3 times in the arm instead of the head, so the officer could chase him down. And he's out there saying, "I pledge allegiance to ISIS." I didn't even realize ISIS had a pledge of allegiance. And skipping on back to the van, though, where the patsies were found, the official story is they were shooting at the police officers, but if you look very carefully, all the windows in that van were still rolled up. And nobody shoots from inside a car out without rolling the window down first, for very obvious reasons to anybody who's actually handled firearms before. So, yeah, I mean, the story is just full of all kinds of holes. And back in the 50s and 60s, when Americans were naive and trusting, they wouldn't see the holes. Just like we can look back at the Kennedy assassination and see all the things that are just wrong with that story. But we didn't see them back then because we believed that the government was telling us the truth. We believed the corporate media was being accurate and honest. Today we know better. Today we know government lies to us, corporate media helps them do it.
That's right. And another aspect of this we need to think about is the motive of the supposed terrorists. We were told in January that the Charlie Hebdo shooting was retaliation for these nasty anti-Islamic cartoons. And that one actually fooled me. I've been looking into the JFK assassination since I was in middle school, and I was all over 9/11 2 years late. But, I'm not the easiest guy to fool, but they fooled me with that because I thought that was plausible. But these latest ones, Paris, they're shooting up cafes, they're shooting up rock concerts, and here in San Bernardino, they're shooting up a facility for disabled people. And somehow, I think if there were real angry Muslim terrorists, they would probably be targeting people like Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and Zelikow. And there's this long, let's go to whodidit.com and look at the list of likely 9/11 perpetrators, the people who created the mass murder of over 1 million Muslims. If there were any real angry Muslims armed and ready to get revenge out there, they would be going after those people. They wouldn't be just targeting a facility for disabled people.
No, they wouldn't. I mean, that was chosen to maximize the shock value. And if you really think about it, most terror attacks are going to be false flags. Because when you have a group of people who want to bring about socio-political change, they need the support of the general public. They're not going to go out and do something that will turn public opinion against them. The analogy I like to use is, how far do you think George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and the boys would have gotten against King George III if they'd started going into colonial schools and shooting the school children there? And the answer is not very. And so anytime you have this group that you're being told is committing these horrible acts of atrocity, you have to ask yourself, how does this benefit them to do this? And if the answer is it doesn't benefit them at all, you're looking at another false flag. And so many have been exposed. We now know that Israel actually set up the hijacking that led to the raid on Entebbe as part of this constant, ongoing program to demonize the Palestinians so nobody feels sorry for them when their lands are being stolen. Shin Bet and Mossad have been carrying out false flag attacks and blaming the Palestinians for the last half century, and they used to get away with it. Now, not so much. Okay?
That's a good point. Yep. And you're right about the who benefits question. And additionally, we should point out that it's usually the more powerful party that wants to start conflict or ramp up conflict or start a war, because the more powerful party is more likely to win and get some resources out of the conflict. But the problem is that people don't want to go to war for aggressive reasons. They only want to fight in self-defense. So the leadership of a powerful country that wants to attack a less powerful country or entity has to find a way to convince its own people to go along with it. And the usual way to do that is to pretend that we are under attack. And you see this pattern over and over and over with every major war the U.S. has fought since the Mexican War. The U.S. has been more powerful, and it's been stealing territory from weaker entities like Mexico. We stole half their territory.
We have to take another 4-minute break. I'm sorry to cut you off. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're finishing up here with Dr. Kevin Barrett. He's got a couple of books out about the Charlie Hebdo false flag, the San Bernardino false flag, and the reality is that governments lie to their people. Rulers lie to get what they want. It's been happening all throughout history. It is not confined just to the United States of America. And I just reposted to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com my article, By the Liars, of the Liars, and for the Liars, which is a look back through history at some of the big steaming piles of bovine excrement ladled by rulers onto their people. And you need to look at it to understand that when the government lies to you about Assad's sarin gas or Saddam's nuclear weapons, it's not unusual, it's not unique, it is business as usual. This is how they get what they want. By the way, I'm being chastised in the email for saying that Charlie Hebdo was satirizing Jews in Israel, and apparently no, that was the one off-limit topic prior to the attack.
I got fired for doing that. You got fired.
Yeah, so Charlie Hebdo was all about insulting the Pope, insulting Catholics, insulting Islam and Mohammed. That's all free speech, but if you say anything about Jews in Israel, off with your head.
Yeah, that's pretty much the rule these days, isn't it?
Yes.
So how do you survive, Mike?
Well, nobody can fire me. I don't work for anybody. So I can say, I can say whatever the heck I want here. What was that old song about freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose?
Yeah.
Been there, done that, didn't buy the T-shirt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, how about these alleged mass sexual assaults in Europe right now? There's this whole lynch mob hysteria that reminds me so much of U.S.
Is Bill Clinton visiting Berlin?
There you go. Yeah, he's probably on a speaking tour.
Well, it's a complex issue. We know that this mass flow of refugees to Europe was being orchestrated by various non-governmental organizations, many of them funded by George Soros. It appears that in the rush to create the New World Order, there's an agenda to take all the different people of the world and blur them all together into one clot of human workers with no sense of identity, who they are, where they come from, to make them more pliant and easy to control. Unfortunately, it has backfired horribly because it's triggering these very intense nationalistic surges in many countries, including Germany, Sweden, here in the United States of America. And so that has backfired rather horribly. Now, the reality is that, again, a lot of these refugees were being told things to motivate them to go to Europe. Including the fact that European women are available. Most of these refugees going into Europe are young men of military age, and, they see all these women around, and they just figured it's New Year's and it's a free-for-all. But it did seem to get totally out of control. The police were not able to handle it. The police in Germany are saying they're literally being blocked from arresting these refugees with screams of racism and targeting well,
wait a minute. Don't you think this might be a false flag, too? We're getting some reports that police were standing by as there were some assaults going on that appeared to be by undercover police. At least one of these incidents.
Yeah.
To me, it looks like there's a false flag hysteria here. Now, I agree with you that the New World Order is trying to dumb down people and get rid of all of the competing power centers, including the nations, the religions, and the families. So, they're trying to mix people up and thereby increase their own power. But I think in this case, they're also playing at a strategy of tension. So they want you to be outraged about this, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is wildly exaggerated or primarily even a false flag or series of false flags.
Well, it could very well be, but it could be coming from competing agendas. One thing that we have to understand is there is no monolithic rulership of the world. They'd like there to be one. But we have, certainly within our own U.S. government, we're seeing tremendous factionalization. where, you know, this group wants more war, this group thinks we've had enough war, this group over here wants more money, this other group over here wants more freedom, and we're seeing a lot of hardball political infighting, and the immigration refugee issue has become a hot button topic. When we started hearing about all these crimes and assaults going on in Europe, my first suspicion was that these were being staged by anti-immigration groups. So we don't really know, but it's cascaded to the point where there's now talk about Angela Merkel having to step down, and we could be seeing a door open to outright civil war, which would certainly be a very powerful tool to bring down the nation states and open the door to a single global government that's going to come in and make us all safe from our neighbors.
That's right. The strategy of tension has been going on for a long time. That was the basis of Operation Gladio, which produced most of the so-called left-wing terrorism in the 1960s. And it looks like maybe they're doing something like that now, pitting the nativists in Europe against the immigrants and using that chaos and possibly even civil war, as you say, to bring order out of chaos by, you know, creating the next big thing as a solution to the, you know, problem that they have created themselves.
Could very well be. I still think that their goal was to have everybody living together and hugging each other and singing Kumbaya, but with
that sounds good to me.
having lost our sense of an historical identity, a cultural identity, or a regional identity, because without that identity, you can't coalesce opposition to oligarchy. And I think that was the thinking, but from my point of view, it appears to have backfired rather badly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you might be right. And in any case, the reason that there are all these refugees, of course, is that Middle Eastern countries have been destroyed by the neoconservatives who staged the 9/11 false flag as an excuse to go and smash up all the countries that could ever pose a threat to Israel. So that's where all these refugees are really coming from. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same hardline Zionists who did 9/11 who are also stirring up trouble between the nativists and the refugees as part of their strategy to bring down every competing center of power. And eventually, Mike, call me crazy, but I think that they are working on a plan to bring back the quote-unquote Messiah and put him on a world government throne in occupied Jerusalem.
Well, apparently Ted Cruz agrees with them because he thinks the second coming of Jesus is about to happen. It's going to help his campaign or something, according to that earlier caller. It is a complicated issue. I think you have more confidence in the strategic planning ability of these self-declared lords of the universe. I'm seeing too many mistakes and miscalculations and a general tendency to get caught up in ideology to the point of not really thinking things through practically. And so I don't think they're going to succeed in their plan primarily because they haven't really thought it all the way through. I certainly hope not. I think humanity would be best served by an Earth with 1,000 little tiny nations, each taking care of their own people, trading across borders. But national borders serve the same function for planet Earth as fireproof doors in a building or watertight bulkheads in a ship. They contain an accident so it does not become a catastrophe for the system as a whole. And the more they try, I mean, even in 2008, we saw economic globalism as the reason why the implosion of the mortgage-backed security fraud on Wall Street quickly spread to the rest of the world and triggered this major downturn. And you'd think they would have learned from that experience to start putting those barricades back up, but the ideology won out, and they're busy taking, they're closing the, they're locking the fireproof doors open, they're locking the watertight hatches open, and they think it makes for a better, more efficient system until that first office fire or that first leak, and then things really fall apart. We may even see that economically this year.
I think you're absolutely right about that, Mike. And that goes for the issue of the euro as well. The euro has totally destroyed the economies of several European countries, notably Greece and to some extent Spain as well. And the people in Europe now are becoming more and more aware that the imposition of the euro on the continent was totally irrational and economically suicidal, and the only question is how to get out of it.
Well, anytime you have a privately owned central bank that's issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest, you're going to get into a situation where the debt always exceeds the available money supply and grows and grows and grows until the debt crashes the system. They're seeing that in Europe. They're seeing that here in the United States. All right, we are at the end of our show. There's our music. Dr. Kevin Barrett, thank you very much. I wish you good luck with your books. We have put the links to your book sales page on WhatReallyHappened.com for those who want to go and buy it. So we're going to let you go here. We'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, share what you know with everybody that you know. According to Gallup, there's a lot of American people starting to ask important questions. Be there with the answers. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.